evening and welcome to the New York Public Library. Before we go any further, please silence your devices. Actually put them on vibrate, turn them off, whatever. Thank you. I'm thrilled to welcome you to this edition of Conversations from the Cullman Center. Mary Dearborn will discuss her new book, Carson McCullers, A Life, with Bill Goldstein. My name is Lauren Goldenberg. I am a Deputy Director of the Dorothy and Louis B. Cullman Center for Scholars and Writers. I am stepping in tonight for the Center's Director, Salvatore Scibona, who is unfortunately unable to be here this evening. As some or many of you may already know, the Cullman Center selects 15 fellows a year for a 9-month term. Fellows receive an office in the center, just next door, access to the library's unparalleled collections, and a stipend so they can focus on their work here during their fellowships. The fellows come from all over the country and the world. They are poets, novelists, translators, academics, biographers, the list goes on. The Cullman Center was founded in 1999, and we are in the midst of our 25th fellowship year. Looking ahead, I invite you to return to the library next Tuesday, March 5th, where past Cullman Center Fellow and International Booker Prize winning translator Jennifer Croft will discuss her debut novel, The Extinction of Irina Ray, with award-winning writer and also past fellow Daniel Saldana Paris. Later in March, we have events planned with Carol Kino and Stephen Hahn. You can find all our conversations listed on the back of tonight's printed program and on our website. Tonight, Mary and Bill will speak for about 35 to 40 minutes before we turn to questions from the audience. If you'd like to ask a question, please write it down on the index card on your seat, and a staff member will walk along the aisles towards the end of the conversation to collect all the cards. This event is being live streamed on YouTube. If you are joining us virtually, hello, and would like to ask a question, please either type it into the chat or email cullmancenter@nypl.org. Copies of tonight's book, Carson McCullers, are available for sale right outside the doors, and Mary has graciously agreed to send copies after the talk, which she will do outside in the hall. And now to introduce tonight's speakers. Bill Goldstein reviews books and interviews authors for NBC's Weekend Today in New York, and was the founding editor of the New York Times Books website. A graduate of the University of Chicago, Goldstein received a PhD in English from the City University of New York Graduate Center. His book, The World Broke Into, Virginia Woolf, T.S. Eliot, D.H. Lawrence, E.M. Forster, and the Year That Changed Literature, was published in 2017. He is writing a biography of Larry Kramer to be published by Crown, and worked on the book as a 2019-2020 fellow here at the Cullman Center. Mary Dearborn holds a doctorate in English and Comparative Literature from Columbia University, where she was a Mellon Fellow in the Humanities. She is the author of 7 books, among them Mistress of Modernism, The Life of Peggy Guggenheim, and a biography of Ernest Hemingway. She worked on her biography of Carson McCullers when she was a fellow here at the Cullman Center in 2017-2018, and she lives in Buckland, Massachusetts. The New York Times called Carson McCullers, which was just published today by Knopf, quote, a necessary book, and according to the Washington Post, it is, quote, an extraordinary biography. Please join me in welcoming Mary and Bill.
Well, thank you, Lauren, and congratulations, Mary, on Publication Day and those reviews. I hope you're ready for a grilling now. So I thought, since your book is so wonderful and it opens with a fabulous scene, and since you set the scene of Carson McCullers' life so beautifully from this moment, I thought we could begin our conversation. If you would describe Carson McCullers as you do in the book at the moment in June 1940 when The Heart is a Lonely Hunter is published.
Yeah, well, it's a great moment. She was 23. If anybody's read The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, that's just flabbergasting.
If anyone is 23,
yeah. It's just, there's no way anyone can know that much or have seen all of that in this southern town. But no, she'd made her way north, and she was in a rooming house, and her husband was elsewhere. They had a fairly open relationship, and she was, poised for something to happen. She knew that just was a big, she knew that she was going to be a great writer and a famous writer, and she fantasized about it when she was very young and wanted to have, you know, a red sports car with her initials on it, and this is from Hard as a Lonely Hunter, and monogrammed underwear, and wear either evening gowns or a tuxedo. She wasn't sure when she, well, this was when she wanted to be a piano player. But anyway, she was absolutely convinced that she was going to be famous, but she had no idea what that might mean, you know. And she, coming from, well, if anybody was coming from Columbus, Georgia, equipped to handle that, strangely, I think she was. I mean, strangely, she could roll with the punches. So anyway, there she was, and she had real trouble prying the last installment of her advance out of Houghton Mifflin. She and her husband needed $200 to get their junker car up to New York, and they weren't forthcoming. She never forgave them. But eventually they made it, and her life was about to begin, and she was absolutely right about that.
I mean, it's an astounding book in its themes and the complexity, not only for someone who was 23, but for 1940. And if you could talk a little bit about the complicated themes and what is overt there that is so surprising that it receives so much acclaim, and then yet also what's buried, because I think if we talk about that, we can begin to get into some of the paradoxes of her life that you already alluded to.
Yeah, it's an amazing book. A friend of mine here, Beth, was rereading it and was reading it, sorry, and brought up this scene in it where the daughter of the black Marxist town physician holds his head, cradles his head in her arms, and said that she'd been so moved by this, and I said, wow, you know, that's just because the emotional maturity to imagine that scene even, it's phenomenal. And then the book is just, it's a very strange book. I mean, I knew that it was a great book, and I loved the book, and I went over it carefully. If you haven't read it, it's about a small southern town, and it's kind of centered around this one person who's a deaf mute, and his the man that he is in love with, who's also a deaf mute, and they're in love. And this is a small southern town in the 30s. And there's no, I don't think she ever says, I mean, there is a kind of directness about descriptions of this that are phenomenal. And there's a whole spectrum of characters who are just astounding. And what I could not figure out is how she even saw any kind of models for those characters in Columbus. I mean, I thought novelists always drew on, what they knew or saw or something, but and there must have been, for example, gay people in Columbus, Georgia, but that she would have come across and recognized, or, it's just, anyway, I was blown away a second time. And it's really about, about people who are outside in some way. And that she always felt about herself.
Yes, you say, I think, at one point in the book that she was drawn to or always understood, sort of an outsider's life. I mean, it's something that you use to sum up her entire body of work. I'm curious, you mentioned your friend Beth reading this book. I mean, was this what drew you to Carson McCullers a long time ago? How did you first discover her, not only as a subject for a biography, but your interest in her as a writer?
Yeah, you know, because I was thinking about this on the way to New York. When I was young, I read Never the Wedding, and I just loved it. And when I was 15 or so, but I don't. And I read not immediately after, but sometime in my adolescence, I read The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. But you know, I never studied them in college or in grad school. And my major field was post-Civil War American literature. I don't know whether she's not taught, or I'd be interested to hear afterward if anybody has memories of that, or did you?
No, I mean, I read mainly 19th century Victorian literature in college, so,
right.
so she didn't fit in there.
Right, but
That's my excuse.
But anyway, so I always loved her, but then it was really kind of fortuitous. I was coming to the end of a project, and I read in the Times Book Review, in those little editorial things they have in the front, something about it being Carson McCullers' 101st birthday. And I said, well, geez, what happened to 100? And it had come and gone. And so I said, what's going on with that? The biographers here will recognize this, what's going on with that situation. But I looked into it, and Carson McCullers' papers had mostly gone to, or half of them, it turned out to be half, had gone to the Harry Ransom Center at the University of Texas, where everybody's papers go. But this other huge amount of papers, which ended up being roughly another half, had been left very recently to Columbus State University in Columbus, Georgia, which is where Carson is from. And they'd been left by this woman, Mary Mercer. And Mary Mercer, I'll have to get for another time, was very close to Carson at the end of her life, and accumulated a huge amount of Carson's papers and a lot of other very interesting things. But Mary Mercer had died at the age of 102, and she just died.
101, 102, I think we're seeing a theme here.
So her papers, and she left all of this, and it was amazing stuff, to Columbus State, and they were still processing it, and I think it was a great time for a biographer to come along. I mean, there had been a biography back in 1975, and it's an excellent biography that the biographer did not have available to her any of these archives. Nothing was in. Carson had died not that long before, and there were no papers yet that anyone knew of, and she interviewed people. And she was a great journalist, this writer. And for me, I, of course, had the archives, but most of the people that she interviewed, almost all of them were dead. So it was very valuable to me that those interviews and her papers, the biographer left her papers somewhere, and so those original interviews were available. So it really was it was a fortuitous, the timing was really great, and I was just like, I was so happy, I can't tell you. I mean, I enjoyed it so much, but I was especially happy when I first realized I could do it.
Well, so I want to come back a little later to the sources, and because there are some incredible, not only were they long delayed in becoming available, but they are very unusual, and you make magnificent use of them. So I do want to discuss that a little bit. But first, I think you say about 1940 and what the themes of The Heart is a Lonely Hunter are, but one of the things that you make very clear is that this was 1940. Some of the writers with who we associate with Carson McCullers, who were her friends, Truman Capote, Tennessee Williams, they had not yet begun to publish. I mean, and so they're sort of in the same historical moment, and yet she is really in the vanguard of some of these themes of race and homosexuality, in a way that moves beyond, the quote Southern Gothic of someone like Erskine Caldwell. But if this book is published in 1940, it's not until later in the decade that The Glass Menagerie is produced, and then not till 1949 that we have Streetcar Named Desire. Other Voices, Other Rooms is 1948. So can you talk about what this novel and what her interests as a writer and the sort of immediate fame of her at 23 sets in motion for the United States and also for these individual writers, for American literature, and then for these very specific writers who are probably eclipse her in fame, I mean, certainly by today.
Yeah. I don't know, that's hard. I have trouble with her as a part of the Southern Gothic. I mean, I guess the Southern Gothic has never been that meaningful a category to me. But for sure, I mean, I think, and people tend to lump her with Eudora Welty, but more Flannery O'Connor, with like freakish characters, and somehow that's to be Southern Gothic. But there's this whole range of things. I mean, there is homosexuality that we get through Truman and Tennessee Williams, but just race. And Carson doesn't always write about race. Well, it's not her. It's not like Faulkner. I mean, where that's one of her major subjects. But she felt that she always felt that she had a novel in her about race, and she wanted to write one. She would say, whenever she was asked about the civil rights movements, all that's going on during her career, she'd say, "Well, I'm going to write about it." And it's, you see her making this promise over and over again, and it's like, this is going to be very hard to do. And in fact, it's her last novel, Clock Without Hands. It's not her best novel, but that she does write about race. But she saw it as the absolute central fact of Southern life, bar none. And that's what she had in common. She and Tennessee Williams, when they met, it was like, because they were drawn to each other right away because they recognized each other as a Southern writer. He wasn't, I'm not sure what he published by then when they met in 46.
Glass Menagerie, I think, was 1945. So.
Yeah, so he's just famous. And she showed up at his summer house on Nantucket and stayed. But so they wrote together at this big table. But when they first met, I swear, it was that they recognized each other as another white person and a progressive white person who was crippled by having been brought up in the South. I mean, and Carson, it was, I don't know that she ever dealt with it in her fiction as successfully as she might have, but it was the fact that she knew it, and that Tennessee Williams also knew it. That's the ground that they met on. And I always thought that was really moving, and that it was more meaningful in a lot of ways than any comparisons to O'Connor or Welty. Not that they are also great writers, just completely different. But and Capote, I don't know. That's he's kind of a wild card. I mean, he wasn't. He actually she accused him of stealing from her in one of her stories, and he seems to have. I can't. But he would probably be the first to admit that. But that was a different kind of friendship, and he's a very different kind of Southern writer.
Mm-hmm.
She's very different from Williams, but I think that was a very close friendship, in spite of the fact that she was very hard to put up with. I'm sure but
He doesn't seem like he was that easy either, but.
Anyway, he managed. He was really, they were very fond of each other.
Well, there are a couple of things I want to go back to that you said earlier. I mean, you described, her not knowing whether she wanted to wear, a sort of beautiful dress or a tuxedo, and that she and her husband had a fairly open relationship. So I'm hoping you can say something about those paradoxes of her life and how you sort of document them, and then also what you were trying to convey and how you were trying to understand these, as I say, paradoxes that were especially difficult for someone in the place she grew up, but also even in the 40s and 50s when she was living in a far more cosmopolitan world.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways. I mean, I think her whole thing about being a lesbian, because I think she primarily was. I think she would be a lot more comfortable now when there's more fluidity about all of this, and I suggest that the word queer is probably the better term to use about her, because it also conveys a sense that there's something off and there's something somewhat transgressive. She really liked to have that edge, and that she wanted that to be there, but also there is this kind of, she had a good time deciding whether she wanted to wear a dinner jacket or an evening dress. She really had a good time with that. And in terms of, it's somewhat, she was married, and her husband, okay, not only was she married, but she married the same person a second time. So there's something deliberate about it. It's not like she married by mistake. I mean, really, though, she married a man twice. And you have to, what is going on? Well, he really, really loved her. And it's a fascinating relationship. And I think that Reeves McCullers, that's his last name, is right up there, I think, in the annals of American literary spouses with Zelda Fitzgerald and Henry Miller's wife June, and I mean, he was really a mess, and but a really fascinating mess and a wonderful writer. He never wrote anything except, or he did. We don't have anything he wrote. He wrote the most brilliant letters, just brilliant. But anyway, he was totally in love with her and supportive of her. And I think you just don't walk away from that. And meanwhile, she was in love with various women. I don't know if I have no idea if she'd been able or willing to act on it at a young, how old she would have been, but she didn't for a long time, and in fact, we don't know, but, I mean, when she did, if she did. But anyway, Reeves was, that was a complicated.
As you make clear, and it certainly was not made less complicated by alcohol.
No, and yes, alcohol, and also he was definitely bisexual, and they had a sort of three-way love affair, though it immediately shook out to be Reeves and him with David Diamond, the composer, in the 40s, and first David Diamond's in love with Carson, and then it's Reeves, and then it's both of them, and Reeves went off and lived with him for a while. Reeves was Who knows? but Reeves, I was going to say he was primarily straight, but I really have no idea. But he was a tortured guy in many ways. He was an alcoholic, and he ended up killing himself. And it's a sad situation. One of the, he was very, I don't know how understanding he really was about her falling in love with other women, but they had a very strange locution for her girlfriends. They called the girlfriends her imaginary friends. I don't even want to try and parse that one, but there's, they were not emotionally hugely healthy people. So.
You certainly make that clear. I mean, one of the phrases that stuck out for me in your book is you describe not only obviously the often older women that she was in love with, but you mention a man named Robert Myers who was her doctor in Paris, and you refer to him as having a puzzling and inappropriate crush on him. And I thought that really sort of encapsulated in a way her entire benighted romantic life, because I mean, it wasn't always inappropriate, but often puzzling and incredibly, it seems, emotionally unsatisfying over the long term for her, and damaging in that way, and it's so sad.
Yeah, she really did. I mean, if you list the people, I mean, they're very odd. There was a woman who was known as the first lady of AA. She was. I mean, well, I know where she finds these people, but I mean, that's just odd. And a Broadway producer who she met in a dentist's office, and she did inappropriate crushes, I think, is what is. I mean, but that was how, that was who she was.
You mentioned Eudora Welty and William Faulkner, and I hope you can say a little bit more about each's reactions to Carson McCullers, because you make that very clear in your book with some wonderful quotes and descriptions of both of them.
I'm kind of blanking. I know she said something really unfortunate about Faulkner and Hemingway. I write better than them. I don't even want. But
well, and since you wrote a biography of Hemingway, you're a very good judge of that.
Right. But Eudora Welty just couldn't stand her. I don't really know why, except they were the same age, and they were coming out with their first books at the same time, and they were at Breadloaf, the first when both of them were just becoming famous, and Eudora Welty just had really choice things to say about her, and I don't know why, they're. And I didn't find this out for a while. I thought, oh yeah, they don't have anything in common, fine. But Eudora Welty really disliked her. I don't know, and she could rub people the wrong way, I think. I don't know that Faulkner ever paid any notice to her.
Oh, you describe it in the book. They meet at West Point, I guess, late.
What?
Oh, well, I mean, and he greets her as my daughter, which I just thought was so moving. I mean,
I'm not sure that actually happened. That's partly why. But yeah, he and the age would be about right. Mm-hmm. But I really looked into that.
One of the things that is so interesting to me as we're talking about her life and career, and you talk about Clock Without Hands, a late work that was approaching what she wanted to say about race, but was less than completely successful. But she died when she was 50. So we're not talking about an extremely long time, and yet it's a very compendious career. And here we are all these years later talking about many of her, or able to talk about many of her books. I mean, Member of the Wedding, Heart is a Lonely Hunter, Reflections in a Golden Eye. And so can you talk a bit about her physical health? I mean, aside from all the emotional problems that you document, I mean, she was physically very bedeviled by problems from a very young age, and it's surprising that in so many ways that she persevered through all of this to continue to write all of these books.
Yeah, it really is amazing. She had a series of strokes, and these were caused by before there were antibiotics. Some of you, I won't say remember this, but have heard about this from parents or grandparents. No, it was terrible. You could get strep throat, and if you didn't have antibiotics, it could develop into rheumatic fever. And then rheumatic fever can just wreak havoc with your circulatory system and leads to strokes a lot and terrible heart problems. And that's exactly what happened to her. And of course, nobody understood that, you know, until antibiotics, but didn't understand that's what had happened to her really until the late 40s, early 50s. And she had these strokes before she was 30, and they left her partially paralyzed. Often it was intermittent. She wasn't constant. She wasn't suddenly paralyzed on her left side for good. She would sometimes, it would not be so bad, but it was generally her health was gone by then, and she was on and off bedridden. And by the time she was 40, she wasn't going far from her bed, but she also was a terrible alcoholic. And this I had not realized when I started working on this. You know, if you come from American literature, you're used to the litany of Fitzgerald, Hemingway, the list goes on. And there aren't really that many women, American women anyway. And damned if she wasn't another one. I mean, it was really dismaying and terrible. Her whole family was, her mother was, her father was, and her sister was in AA and got sober, didn't pretty successfully, and Reeves occasionally would go to AA and get sober for periods, but Carson never. Nobody ever breathed a word to her about drinking because the family and everyone around her thought she was a genius, and you didn't question a genius. You know, so that it's this, it's when it wouldn't have been hard to say, you know, Carson, come to AA with us,
right.
or you know, it was kind of lying right there on the table, and it was really tragic. And she and Reeves, they went through periods when they were just reeling around Paris, a whole months-long residency in Paris. They were, as far as I could tell, drunk the whole time. And so, and arguably, she was indeed drinking because she was in a lot of pain, or that was one of the things that factored into her drinking. And on the other hand, the drinking wasn't doing her health any good. And it was pretty much a vicious circle. And, okay, so her work, she had a small body of work, but it was pretty great. But there you did start seeing a falling off. Right. And I guess, you know, she's bedridden by then, practically bedridden when she writes Clock Without a Hand, so it's hard to it's really hard to unravel this sort of tangled ball.
Well, you make it so, I mean, it's so moving as you describe it, because I think at one point as she's sort of thinking through or wanting to write Clock Without Hands, you refer to a long writer's block that she had, and then the physical difficulty of typing. She's able to type with one hand, and then she has to dictate. And you have this marvelous description, I think, from Stuart Sherman about the beauty of the sentences that she would dictate, even if she could only dictate a few.
She mostly dictated. She wrote an autobiography at the end of her life. It's very slight or uneven, I guess, but it's fascinating. And she dictated it. I mean, it's really extraordinary. So it's the might have beens with Carson McCullers are really extraordinary.
So we talked earlier a little bit about this woman named Mary Mercer, and if you could explain a little bit more about who she was and why she came to have this massive cache of Carson McCullers' papers, and then, as I indicated, some of the very unusual things that you were able to draw on that aren't just what we think of as papers.
Well, she was a psychiatrist, and Carson was having terrible problems finishing Clock Without Hands, or even really getting it underway. And friends saw how miserable she was and sent her to this. Carson was living in Nyack, New York, and sent her to Mary Mercer, who was a psychiatrist living in Nyack. And Carson went to. Carson had about 10 or 12 sessions with them, and they stopped, and then later they became very close. They fell in love and had a romantic relationship, and it was really, I guess, Carson's first real girlfriend. Of course, we don't know anything about the real nature of it, but they both seemed very happy. But meanwhile, those, and Carson left her house in Nyack and its contents, which is a lot of papers and a lot of, to Mary Mercer. And now so that house in Nyack now belongs to Columbus State University, which I kind of love. But it's a beautiful Victorian right on Main Street in Nyack there. But among those things, when Carson was seeing Mary Mercer as a psychiatrist, for some reason, Carson wanted to tape the sessions. She felt that she'd have a better feeling of control. Who knows why you do these things. But Mary Mercer agreed, and they were taped and transcribed. And they did not, anyway, then the treatment played itself out, and in fact, Carson did get over her writer's block, and the relationship with Mary Mercer started. But then Mary Mercer, the transcripts of those psychiatric sessions were among the papers that Mary Mercer left to Columbus State, and they're amazing documents, and they're about 20 pages each, and about 10 sessions, and it's really interesting to read anyone's, I think, a transcript of a psychiatric session, just from the sublime to the ridiculous, And she was obsessed at the time with Lana Turner's boyfriend killed. Lana Turner's daughter killed Lana Turner's boyfriend. And
Johnny Stompanato.
Stompanato, exactly.
I'm older than 23.
So in every session, they talked about Johnny Stompanato, or Carson did. But she also, she really did. For me, the most moving thing, there was a lot about falling in love with the love of Carson's life when she was young, a Swiss Anne-Marie Schwarzenbach, and it was a lot about how that romantic relationship went or didn't go, as it were, and about, we talked earlier about Carson not feeling ever loved, and amazingly, and the psychiatrist saying, I'm sure that's not true. And Carson said, really? You know, I might have been loved.
It was one of the most, I mean, the things you've just said about Lana Turner's daughter and whether Carson McCullers thought she was lovable. On the one hand, incredible biographical restraint, because I wanted to hear more about what she said about Lana Turner, but also the beauty of that exchange that you've just summarized, that Carson McCullers expresses a kind of incredulity that her friends have loved her, and in turn, Mary Mercer doesn't believe really that Carson McCullers could believe that.
Yeah, it's just, you know, it's kind of the it's not the impossibility of love. It's how screwed up about it we can get. But yeah, so these transcripts were in those papers, and it's Mary Mercer, for the rest, Carson died in '67, and Mary Mercer always refused to give interviews about her, and she pleaded the doctor-patient relationship, which is a little, I mean, it was handy that she could say that, but you know, there's a question about, of course there was a question about using these transcripts, so I felt that if Mary Mercer decided that she could leave them, and when, I don't know how many years, well, it was almost Carson's 101st birthday, you know, it was a long, long time later, and if Mary Mercer felt they could be seen, and I think Carson also, with having them recorded and transcribed, there's I didn't feel a sense of, you know, voyeurism exactly. I really felt privileged,
Right.
and it was incredibly, it was helpful, but it was moving, and a lot, you know, to see someone's, I think reading anybody's transcripts, but Carson McCullers, I mean, she's just, she's extraordinarily complex, and seeing it kind of laid out there for you. And Mary Mercer's a good doctor. She barely talked, you know, just here and there. Anyway, I thought it was a great, it was a great privilege.
I mean, she was such a guardian that if she had wanted not to have people see them, she could have destroyed them. But before we go to questions, I want to ask you about one last thing. You say that it was a privilege, you know, to be able to read these transcripts, and I was thinking of what you told me just before we came on stage about another privilege, that you actually lived in Carson McCullers' house in Nyack for 3 weeks or so. So if you could talk about that experience.
Yeah, that was really something. They were exchanging notes about their fancy writing residencies. Anyway, it was in Columbus, Georgia, actually. It was a little family house, which is a bungalow, sort of craftsman-style house, and it's a historic house now, and it's furnished with some of Carson's things and a typewriter and books and some of her clothes. But on the back of this house is attached this apartment. Somebody left this house to Columbus State University. They've been very lucky with real estate. but anyway, they have an apartment attached on the back, and they just, it was not, they do have writing residencies, but they just had, you know, let me stay there when I was down doing research there, and it was really something. It was, I was always asked if it was haunted, but it was really, when I was done working for the day, and the apartment's real comfortable, it was really, I could just go up, and first I made my meals in the kitchen, and ate in, they had a breakfast nook I actually looked it up, and these were sort of new in the 20s and very fancy, you know, and I'd eat in the breakfast nook, and I'd kind of wander around, and it was very evocative and moving too. But also, this had a very capacious front porch, and I happen to know from the transcripts of the psychiatric sessions about a particularly steamy sex session between Carson and Reeves out on the front porch. So there I am in the wooden porch swing, just saying, well. So that was a lot of fun, and it was, it was very evocative and just as helpful as your fancy writer's retreat.
Well, the story was a lot of fun and very evocative, so thank you. We'll now go to questions from the audience. Thank you for these. Trying to think of the best order. Some of them are quite long. How would Carson McCullers respond to today's epidemic of loneliness? Does our own understanding of loneliness differ significantly from how she understood it?
Oh, that's really hard.
Maybe you need some time alone to figure it out.
Well, wasn't somebody was just quoted as saying we're having a terrible epidemic of loneliness?
Maybe it was this person.
No, I want to say it was Biden or something, a political figure. But I'm not sure about that, but I do think that loneliness is central to, just as love is, really, to understand. It's absolutely central to her life, and it's not just, the heart is a lonely hunter, which is a evocative phrase. It's from a Scottish poem. It's, she didn't make it up, but it's that there's this fundamental loneliness that we all have, that and we can be loneliest, feeling loneliest in love, and I think that's brilliant. I think that's something that she wrote about better than almost anyone.
You said that Carson McCullers knew she wanted to be famous. Did she leave any instructions or clues for her biographers?
Oh, I don't think so. I don't think so, and I'm not sure what she would have made of it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really not. I don't know.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit more about her childhood and family that would help us understand how she became the writer she was, her sensitivity to the, quote, other, her ability to stand apart from her Southern roots?
You know, yeah, you don't really see it in her family. She was like, not in the family, in the Southern roots part, I think it's definitely valid. The family is so, she always reminded me of another subject of mine about the only way she reminds me of him is Norman Mailer. No, but she was so adored. She was just adored and just made to feel that she could be anything she wanted to see. And her family, her mother was quite cultured and quite musical, in fact. And but the husband was kind of a solitary fellow, and the mother had these sort of salons for local, the Fort Benning was there, and various universities. For some reason, the mother, a lot of young people would come over and listen to music there, but yeah, her Southern upbringing, as I said, it's flabbergasting to me that Columbus, Georgia, produced this person, really. I mean, in many ways, only a small town, but not really. I mean, she had a very kind of a wide-angle lens, you know, from a very young age. So I don't quite know, I don't, the South was important in terms of issues like race that she brought to it, but the actual small town Southern life, not so much.
You mentioned her mother's salons and music. Is that why when you said at the very beginning that she wanted to be a pianist?
Yeah, she wanted she studied to become a concert pianist, and she was on her way to Juilliard, and it's not quite clear what the sequence was, but she instead ended up taking writing classes at Columbia. But I always maintain this is nothing terribly original on my part, because it's in Heart is a Lonely Hunter. There's a girl who's clearly modeled on Carson, though Carson's invested in all the characters, who's Mick. And Mick goes around the small southern town lying in the bushes and listening to people's radios and listening to classical music on the radio. Anyway, Mick wants to be a composer, not a pianist, and it always struck me that that's got to be what Carson wanted to be. You know, if you're really, she was such a romantic, imaginative child. She'd say, "Oh, I want to be Beethoven. You know, I don't want to just play him." I mean, with no real sense of the musical difference or the musical, you know, that kind of outsized imagination and ambition for herself, that seemed to be more in keeping. But nobody really asked her that, and it's not clear how she might have even, you know, gone about that. But so she was a very talented musician and could have been a concert pianist, but long story, but she got swerved and became a writer instead.
I mean, the thing you say about being a composer, I mean, then it makes me think to David Diamond and the relationship she had with him, and then also her friendship during the 40s in Brooklyn in February House with Benjamin Britten. I mean, so she was friends with composers.
Yes, and she was fascinated by, and Paul Bowles. She had a thing for Jane Bowles, of course, but Paul Bowles, because he was a composer, she was fascinated by it. And she did immediately bond with Paul Bowles and Diamond and Benjamin Britten. Yeah, that was an important relationship.
I didn't read that question. We have time for two more. I hope there are two more on these cards. This is a somewhat open-ended question. I think you may have addressed it a little bit, but why is Carson McCullers not generally cited as among the greatest American writers?
I think it's because of the relative size of the body of work, and because she died young, and because she was a woman, and I mean, Flannery O'Connor and Eudora. Well, let's not get into that. But no, I mean, I don't really want to get into it. But she's it's idiosyncratic and kind of hard to characterize, and doesn't fit into the great American themes. I think she should be. I mean, I think she should be. I think she should be in the canon, and if she's not taught, I don't know why not. And anyway, I hope it changes. It's hardly what I was up to.
The last question will be, what is your favorite discovery you made in your research? Was there something you had to leave out of the book you wish you could have included?
I'm looking at my husband. There were, I mean, I know there were, but I'm not sure I want to reveal them, or the biggest surprise for me, and in a way the biggest pleasure, though it was tragic, was learning about her husband, Reeves. And that was all new to me, and though it's in the previous biography somewhat, he was just such a fascinating and tortured character. He came from a family, I'll just real quickly, he had 4 brothers and sisters. They all killed themselves, but they also all left the South. I mean, they were poor. I mean, the family split up. It was such a mess. But the mother ended up actually lived in Nyack for a while, and they all wanted something more. A brother ended up in Greenwich Village. They had their sights set higher. And it's really remarkable that he and Carson found each other. I've always felt. Anyway, God, I wish I'd found his notebooks, his writing, because it hasn't survived apparently, unless Mary Mercer swirled it away somewhere.
Well, on that note, what we're thinking of are things that are squirreled away for future biographers or for the next biography you're going to write.
Yes. Well, thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you all. And so Mary will now sign books. And thank you very much.